Emeritus Professor of Physics Hal Lewis, formerly of California University, said this: "The global warming scam is the greatest and most successful pseudo-scientific fraud I have seen in my long life as a physicist."
Hello, and welcome to the show. Colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark. This week, we ask the question, are we ignoring the real dangers of climate change? Well, the world is now nearly 1 degree warmer than it was before the widespread industrialization. Now, that's according to the World Meteorological Organization. The global average temperature for the first 10 months of 2018 was 0.98 Celsius, now above the levels of 1850 to 1900. Now, that's according to 5 independently maintained global data sets. Well, whoopee-doo. What does that really mean? Well, yes, representatives from nearly 200 countries are gathering in Poland for talks on climate change, aimed at breathing new life into the Paris Agreement. Now, the UN has warned that the 2015 Paris Accords goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels is in danger because major economies, including the US and the EU, are falling short of their pledges. Clergyman Pete, are we really ignoring the dangers of climate change?
I think that we are. We're ignoring the real dangers. There's been a what I might call a political takeover of the scientific community, such that now many people are employed as climate scientists or even climate change scientists, rather than simply scientists. And what I mean is they're employed to do research, assuming that man-made or anthropomorphic climate change is a reality, whereas that's far from proven. And indeed, the assumption that carbon dioxide is the driver of climate change is disproved by the same data that's used by people to predict catastrophic things happening, such as anthrax coming back as animals dethaw, as the plague coming back as bugs dethaw in there. Yes. The seas are going to rise and sweep across the land. Now, this nightmare scenario, I believe, is false. It's scaremongering. But there are dangers in climate change. Climate change which isn't caused by what humans have done. Climate change is, of course, happening. We're getting warmer. So let's prepare for what's going to happen to the climate instead of what we might call now useless attempts to damp down the industrial revolution's effects by ruining economies in the Western world. Instead of doing that, come up with scientific solutions, engineering solutions to a warmer climate. And if, as will inevitably happen, the Earth cools again, and maybe not that long away, maybe 20 years, 30 years' time, the Earth will get cooler again if people who study the effects of the sun on the Earth are correct in saying that that is the driving force behind the major changes in our climate. If they're right, it's going to be 20, 30 years, it's going to start getting colder again. And if that's true, we're not prepared for that either. So let's look at the real problems. We're ignoring the real dangers of climate change and instead getting political interference, such that, like you get interference, like people putting their hands in where they're not wanted, but also interference like you get with a broadcast. Like if we're trying to broadcast and there's some sort of problem with the internet, and you get interference, and the real message doesn't get through. That's what's happening. We're seeing interference. People don't see the real science because it's been clouded out by all these political claims.
Well, and listeners, I'm just about to bring out the straitjacket. As you can probably tell, Clergyman Pete is very passionate about this subject. Now, just for your awareness, he has a scientific background, and so hence
Yes,
I
I
know
do.
that.
Yeah.
So this this is one of the reasons he finds the whole situation exasperating. However, we do have to recognise that the 20 warmest years on record have been the past 22 years. And of course, what we've seen is it's ramped up even more in the last 3. Now, if this trend continues to rise, then, and it's possible that it may rise between 3 and 5 degrees C by the year 2100. Now, some scientists say that even 1 degree may not sound like very much, according to some, but the world could face catastrophic changes both in sea levels, the rising, as Clergyman Peters mentioned, and ocean temperatures with the issues there on glacial forms, etc., could mean that it could affect so many other things, even things such as the crop output, whether it be our rice, maize, and wheat that we all actually rely on so much, could be in danger. But it's not just that. It could be also that it could change the ecosystem of the entire ocean. Some people are very worried about the fish levels. But I would like to raise, Clergyman Pete, another point, that is there a point of inevitability that we're really just ignoring some of the dangers that are inevitable? So I'm going to sort of give a sort of a metaphorical thought here. And here, of course, the best way to do this is, of course, in the form of a little poem. And this is called The Seal of Fate. Neil the seal thought life's appeal was swimming for fish all day. He craved for krill for such a thrill, despite dangers in the way. Suddenly Neil did feel against his heel something warm and wet with hair. He began to keel, gave out a squeal, and was eaten by a polar bear. The fact of the matter is, Clergyman Pete, that there is an inevitability about climate change, and maybe going about your business in the usual way probably isn't the good thing. So I do agree that perhaps you have to be aware of dangers, but there are some dangers that you just cannot legislate for. Climate change will always come, and fluctuations in temperature has happened. Let's be honest, our planet has experienced an awful lot over the many thousands and millions of years.
Yes.
Is there something here that maybe that perhaps we just ought to accept that maybe we're overanalyzing this a little bit too much? Maybe there will always be dangers, and possibly some of the dangers that we're thinking about, maybe actually it's not the industrial world, maybe it's something else.
Yes, I mean that's the issue. Yes, I've calmed down a bit now. I get so worked up because it's so warm because of this global warming going on. Look, the thing is that
watch out for that polar bear.
The thing is that where to start with all this? Yes, well, first of all, your statement there. Well, maybe we just need to get used to the fact that climate does change, and that's the problem that I'm trying to highlight. That whatever we do, just take the what we might call the climate change scaremonger position. That the Earth is going to increase. What amazing figure did you come up with? 5 degrees in the next 5 seconds. What was it? 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. Whatever made up. Whatever they predicted by their computer model. Whatever it is, I say it in that way because they have a history of failed predictions. If the predictions of these same people from the IPCC were correct, I'd be now sitting in 5 foot of water. It's a bit, as living next to the ocean as I do. Now,
yes.
So, but even if they are correct, and that the cause is due to carbon dioxide being pumped out, and somehow the natural homeostatic effects of the atmosphere and the Earth's troposphere doesn't work just in that particular situation to help their theory. Say that happens and there's an increase in carbon dioxide and it's not absorbed by the plants and the seas, etc. Say that has been happening, and somehow, despite all scientific evidence to the contrary, this still tiny proportion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has a greenhouse effect, which such that the temperature rises with increasing carbon dioxide, instead of, as the scientific records show, the carbon dioxide rising after the rise in temperature. Let's forget the facts against it. Let's just assume that they're correct. What can we do about it? And the answer is not much. Whatever we do, unless you're going to say, now let's say, right, let's get rid of all industry. Let's go back to just living off the field. We've got to decrease the population by several million. Let's have a mass cull and just have a few people living in mud huts and fields. Then I guess you could stop the effects that we're talking about, if they're true. We're just assuming they're true at the moment. But that's not going to happen, let's just be honest. So instead of doing that, my plea is, instead of trying to reduce the carbon footprint, reducing a little bit the output of carbon dioxide, which is not going to have any effect, really. Well, it's not going to have any effect if they're wrong, but even if they're right, it's not going to have a large enough effect. Even their own predictions state as much. So, that being the case, let's instead make preparations to take advantage of the situation. If the climate's going to get warmer, let's take advantage of it. One thing you could do is have huge sugar-producing crops, and from that produce fuel for your cars. Suddenly have lots of cheap fuel. There are ways to manage it. And the other thing to do is, apart from the obvious thing of putting on more sunscreen, be prepared to move people. If the seas are going to rise in certain areas, make preparations for people to move. If there's going to be problems with people it being too hot in certain areas, again, make preparations for that. But I don't see those preparations at all. There's no comment on them. There's very little in the scientific community talking about them, certainly not in the mainstream. There are people on the fringes, and this isn't really the fringes, and in Japan. There is a multidisciplinary research group in Japan looking at climate not changing because of carbon dioxide, but because of a change in the heat output and the what's often called the solar wind output from the sun, particles from the sun, which really do affect the cloud cover on the Earth and really do affect the temperature of the Earth. There's research there that's been done on how you cope with such changes. But apart from that, it's not being done. There isn't the same amount of money being pumped into it as it being pumped into trying to stop it. And you can't stop it unless, even on the models of the IPCC, which is what is normally quoted, the intergovernmental body that collates all this information. We can't. Let's get ready for the change. Let's stop thinking we're like gods and can just change the climate at will. We can't do it. So let's get ready to respond.
Well, I know that a lot of environmentalists are sort of jumping up and down, waving their Mother Nature hats.
Well, don't just jump up and down.
Well, look.
Put a comment. Let's have a conversation. Put a comment there. So, show that I'm wrong. Go on. I dare you.
I know. So a lot of environmentalists are concerned about Neil the seal and many of our other little friends that we've highlighted. But there is one creature that I would like to bring up who I feel perhaps needs to be given a little bit more love, but certainly isn't. And that, of course, is Donald Trump. Now, the US environmental policy has shifted in Trump's administration, which has pursued a pro-fossil fuels agenda. Yep. Now, after taking office, Donald Trump announced that the US would withdraw from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Now, at the time, Trump said that he wanted to negotiate a new fair deal and that would not disadvantage US businesses and workers. Now, I want to emphasize the businesses and workers situation, because let's be honest, with the industrial might of the United States, let's be honest, with their petrochemical industries and let alone their other manufacturing industries spewing out goodness knows what into the environment, it's inevitable that his focus at the moment is on workers. Now, he has quite rightly pointed out that has been a priority. He said that even when he was going into the campaign before he became president, that was the key thing. Now, I understand that there is that to consider. So I want to sort of bring in the Donald Trump factor into this. I mean, what on earth can we do here where you need parties to unite under one policy for any kind of chance to the industrial community to have any effect to reduce carbon, and you already highlighted the carbon footprint. You need all stakeholders, and to not have the United States in this process really sort of makes any effort futile.
Yes. Yeah. You want me to comment on that?
Oh,
I'll
I
tell you what,
want.
Mark.
You think Trump should should? What should we do with Trump?
Well, I think that on this issue, he's right. I mean, I don't. I think that people should follow his lead. I don't see that there's, as I said, I don't think we can do anything about it. If the United States came on board, just look at the predictions they actually make. If everyone went according to the recommendations of the Paris Accord, you'd still make minimal impact. It's just not worth it. You may as well, or it would be far better to put your research and get all these countries together to put money into research, and not just research, into entrepreneurs, funding entrepreneurs who are going to develop ways to cope with global warming. It's global warming is happening. The climate is changing. There's disagreement, and I am strongly disagreeing with the consensus view on how it's happening. So you're going to bring countries together, let them do something to actually cope with the situation.
Yes, but I mean, take China. I know that you've actually lived there, and the fact is that they are very coal-based at the moment, in the sense that, if you go to Beijing, you can hardly breathe. In fact, I'm surprised that anyone can breathe at all. The fact of the matter is that they are so reliant on the fossil fuel that, unfortunately, it's inevitable that they are contributing to environmental issues. Now, this is where, again, there has to be a plan to at least unite to transition. We're not saying stop using coal or any other kinds of fuels, for that matter, that might be spewing out things into the environment. But at the moment, I'm not seeing the commitment to a clear plan. And that's the problem. People keep having nice little cozy meetings, whether it be in Poland, Paris, or anywhere else for that matter. And yet, I think the general public just seem a bit clueless as to where we're really going with trying to tackle issues on climate change.
Now, the issue over burning coal. Now, Beijing has supposedly solved its clean air problem. Suspicions are that they've made a sort of temporary fix, maybe by putting filters over, or maybe banning the use of certain coals in the centre to give a good image for the press. There is suspicion over it, but certainly at the moment, I'm looking at a picture now taken recently. There's blue skies over Beijing, but the problem is that if you want to cope with what the real issue is to do with using coal, which produces dirty fumes, it's the effects on people's lungs. It's the filth that gets everywhere. It's the quality of life.
Yes, exactly.
It's pollution that's the issue, not climate change caused by coal. Climate change is an issue that I think needs to be separated from coping with pollution. So again, if you're going to get countries together to agree to have certain standards, the standards need to be to do with clean air, which is in there, but it should be that and not the climate change issue. Needs to be separated off, because that, as I say, I think what we need is to get measures in place to cope with it as it happens. Rather, if you're saying to somewhere like China, you've got to claw back your economy and claw back your industry, they're going to either say yes and not do it, or simply laugh in your face. They're not going to do that.
I think they might just laugh at us.
Yes, they're not going to be joining in with any such thing, and they're going to outpace the US if the US signs up to such things. Hence, Trump's refusal. That's why I think Trump is right in this particular situation. The other situations, we've been very critical of him on this channel. We praise him when he does good things, criticize him when he does bad things. This not joining in the chorus of climate change scaremongering of the Paris Accord was a good thing. That's something good that Trump has done, and I'm very much in favour of countries making more money from their industrial output, and then coming up with entrepreneurial, clever solutions to the problems of climate change. Look, what are we doing trying to damp down the very industries that could produce the solutions to our future problems. For
Mm.
example, chemical solutions, producing
Yes.
foods that we need when we, as is inevitable, global cooling comes the next lot. Maybe a long time in the future, but that's going to see a huge reduction in crops. Then you're talking about a real crisis when that happens, a long time in the future. But let's get ready now. Let's
Yeah.
start to put research into the right areas.
Yes. Well,
Come on,
listeners, I
guys.
know, I know somebody who's very passionate about this subject, and listeners, I'm sure you are too. So we would love to hear from you. So, as we already know, statistics are there. Do we believe them or do we not? Now, in fact, just to conclude, the sea ice has been reducing for decades, with melting accelerating since the early 2000s. Now, that's only just according to some statistics from the UK Parliament's Environmental Audit Committee. Now, some even predict that the Arctic Ocean may be ice-free in the summer as soon as the 2050s, unless emissions are reduced, the committee has said. Well, what do you think? Log on to markandpete.com and Neil the Seal. If you are there, we would love to hear from you too, because it's going to affect you. Let us know your thoughts. Fill out the contact form. Well, I'm sure this is going to rumble for many, many, many more years to come. Well, thanks for joining us today, and join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark. Ooh, it's getting very warm in here.